right. So like that's always been the most intriguing thing for me is realizing at some moment in time you realize that it's actually the practitioners who decide a little bit where the law goes, not vice versa. And so to your point, there's plenty of lawyers that will tell you what you can't do. I think the lawyers that tell you, sort of yes, maybe instead of no are the ones that I've always wanted to be. And what you realize is now every single company does that.
My guest today is Dave Peinsipp. Dave is a senior partner at Cooley and has advised some of the most important technology companies in the world, including LinkedIn, Snap, Uber, Robinhood, and more recently, OpenAI. He's worked on IPOs, major transactions, and moments when the rules are still being written in real time. I know Dave from my role as a board member at Weedmaps, where Dave is our outside counsel. Over the past 4 years, I've come to know Dave. I knew he would be a great Zero to Proof guest because of his expertise and insights and strategic thinking, which in my experience makes him quite unique among senior counsels, combined with a rare degree of humility and compassion. In this conversation, we talk about what it looks like to operate at the level that Dave is, being in the boardrooms where Dave is, and when you no longer need to prove yourself. We get into judgment versus rules, how to think about risk, and what changes when you have the freedom to walk away from clients or situations that don't align with what matters most to you. We also discuss being in the room during some of the most consequential moments in tech and what you learn when you're consistently on the cutting edge of technology and law.
Thanks for taking the time. And so the I think I mentioned this a little bit to you, but I wanted to kind of give you a little bit of the theme of it, and kind of why Dave a little bit.
Sure.
So the basic premise of this is people who have been successful often get to a point in their professional life where they're no longer there to prove something to someone else. So they're either got literally don't have anything to prove to anybody, or they're doing it for their own personal motivations. But the normal pressures that people live under, they're no longer applied. So they, in a version, you either have fuck you money or you have fuck you attitude or something till you get to the point. And it's often, and so for a number of people, they have shifted away from working full time, in a role which you haven't done. And, they've gone
Right.
to, I either want to try to go to something smaller, or what I really want to try to figure out is how I can have more flexibility, sort of in a sense, more of, a version of, I want to work on different things. I'll maybe be on some boards. I want to try to be individual. And that one is hard to do, on its own. But the biggest thing for me is it turns out it's aspirational to a lot of people. I'd love to get to the point where I felt I had more choice in my life. And what you find, although money matters, it's not primarily a financial decision. I don't know, but I'm speculating that you could stop if you wanted to, but you keep going for a variety of reasons. Usually it's, I love the work I'm doing. I like to be engaged. The energy of the people I get to be involved and work with is still there. And so I don't want to stop. And so it's, Pharrell Williams at the Grammys, he was like, I have one message for everybody, don't stop working. And so for me, what I found is, for some people, it's an alternative life model to retiring, which isn't really your thing. For others, it's, I want to stay involved. And so the interesting question for people is, what becomes the North Stars that continue to guide you? If you kind of look back and you look back, where were the moments where you kind of realized, all right, I'm no longer seeking the approval of other people, in some form, I'm doing this. And then kind of what I have learned is, for almost everybody, it's built on the foundation of the relationships they've built over their life. That whether there are people who were sponsored them or mentored them or their extended network. And so let's kind of hear about Dave, if you don't mind.
Yeah, my pleasure. And thank you. A lot of kind words there, which I'll quickly breeze over. But yeah, I mean, look, I do think, I think for me, and I maybe when I first came out here tech aspect of the practice was pretty exciting. Definitely not what I thought growing up. I think most lawyers growing up, for me, it was Atticus Finch, but the whole point was to be some sort of make the greatest argument you could make. And that usually happened in court. I quickly learned in law school and as an associate that I didn't like doing research to write briefs that then somebody else would just gut all my beautiful and language and take out all the jokes. And so I sort of transitioned over to the advisory side and the corporate side because I think it allows you to have a little bit more personality. And the only way you could get that personality I felt in litigation was to work for 20 years to finally be, make the arguments. And I remember when I got here, like all of our big cases at Cooley, Steve Neal was like this god. He would come in and read the brief that somebody wrote for 6 months, and he was so good. He'd do the arguing for you. I was like, well, I'm not waiting that long to be that. I like being in boardrooms, right? You get to a boardroom as like a third year, and a lot of lawyers are sort of scared in those rooms. They're worried about saying the wrong things. But I think for me, it allowed me to, be conscious that I didn't know everything I was talking about. But that's the beauty of tech, I think, as well, is that you got a lot of young founders. Not everybody thinks they're an expert on everything. They understand that there's a lot of sort of judgment that you'll get over the years, but at first it's about good ideas. And so it played well for somebody like me who I think would rather be wrong but engaged than be right and wait to speak. And so that environment, I think, was useful to me. I also think that there was very few lawyers, I think, that were a little bit like me. And so I had a chip on my shoulder, of course, for long hair, and I think I had a couple of earrings at the time. And I went to University of Florida, not Harvard, and so sort of a trailer park kid, a little out of place with all the Dean's List guys. So I always had a little bit of a work really hard, try to become an expert on every topic you could, and then people start to see it over time. But to your point, as you sort of grow into who you're going to be as a lawyer, you wake up one day and you sort of say, wow, I guess I got, combination of luck, of course. I'm a big believer in Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers, right? So if you started doing law in 2001 in Palo Alto, it's very unlikely that you're not going to have done really well if you stuck with it. So time and circumstance matters as much as anything else. But then you sort of get into a phase where it's okay. The lawyers are valued here. They make lots of money. We get to invest in our clients. There's lots of different ways to be successful. Then it starts to be like, what is the pieces of this that make it really, really compelling? And what I would say is, you also have to be fortunate, but taking Uber public and being there when Travis was going through his thing with Benchmark and the madness of, the Waymo IP case, like there was so much interesting stuff happening, and it felt so important to them, but also extraordinary moments in time, right? The disruption of technology, if you can get inside of it while it's happening. And I feel that way about my AI clients today. Like I can't imagine leaving right now while it feels like an entire world's future of how we're going to interact with each other. Whether these books don't matter today, but they're certainly not going to matter in 5 years. And what's going to happen to law firms? What's going to happen to SaaS companies? What's going to happen to transportation? You're sitting at a place in time and space that to me, as great it was to sit at home and golf every day, and I do like golf, it's nothing compared to the excitement of being in this sector in this moment right now.
And being in the room, as you described, I mean, you've had, like you said, there's a certain amount of right place, right time. There's also a certain amount of you're around enough smart people who don't tolerate fools, so your ability to be present in a way that you could be a respected partner at that table. I mean, you might want to mention some of the clients you've had, and it would be super interesting without disclosing anything, just some of the things you've learned of how to play that role.
Yeah. And I think you go at some point, you realize you stop answering. You still answer them, but they're not the questions you want or the questions anybody's paying you to be there for, sort of what 8K is required or this. It's, I remember when we were taking LinkedIn public, right? There weren't any sort of examples of how companies were going to be able to go and do interviews the day of the IPO on the floor. Nobody had done it before. And you could just imagine the bank's reaction to this, right? Of, well, it's a clear violation of Section 5 of the Securities Act. There's just no way around that. And we said, yeah, I know it is, but they're gonna do it, and the stock is already sold, right? So like that's always been the most intriguing thing for me is realizing at some moment in time you realize that it's actually the practitioners who decide a little bit where the law goes, not vice versa. And so to your point, there's plenty of lawyers that will tell you what you can't do. I think the lawyers that tell you, sort of yes, maybe instead of no are the ones that I've always wanted to be. And what you realize is now every single company does that, right? So the first one that freaked everybody out, all those hard calls, it would have been easier to just say no, tell the CEO you can't do it, tell Reed Hoffman you couldn't do it. But finding a way to do it and then dealing with the sort of questions around like, well, how'd you get comfortable? Here's how we got comfortable. And now it's a matter of course. Same thing when I took Snap public, like doing no vote stock. I mean, the SEC was livid with us. They just could not comprehend like why you would do this. No one's ever done it before. No one's done it since, but they will one day. But
They got they got away with that.
yeah, I mean, but
I don't mean they got away with
I
it
don't-
legally. I mean they got away with it.
Yeah.
Yes, they
Right.
got people to
Right,
buy
and
the
of course
story
the-
enough. Yeah,
you saw the not only the listings come down, but the indexes go against it. All sorts of so it wasn't liked, but that moment in time where 23 SEC people are on the phone grilling us about how we got comfortable and how it works with, sort of proxy rules and everything else. And yeah, it slowed us down, but we got through it. And ultimately, and I think, man, that's where you want to be, right? At the very bleeding edge of what can be done in those types of situations. And this is what's going to happen pretty soon with any number of companies in the AI space, right? Like how far are we going to be able to take some of these disruptive technologies and how's that relate to something that nobody thinks is an area for disruption, securities law. But it is, it absolutely is, right? And you could see it with Kalshi and Polymarket today. I mean, I'm working with a number of companies that are at the very bleeding edge of that. I did the first Robinhood IPO where we gave shares to retail in an IPO. Like that was fun, right? So anytime there's something like that, and I just don't think you'd get that in other spaces, this is where you get it.
it's not just the sector. I referred to the consigliere thing. Is people for you to show up where your judgment is trusted on some pretty you just described. There's a series of very very important decisions that impact people, that impact money, that impact a lot of stuff. And you're kind of inventing, I think that a lot of people don't give lawyers much credit for inventing, but I think your point is the invention is figuring out, yes, maybe. And then, it's not your call, that's somebody else's call, but, it's like, I think about this where, it's like to some degree, what's the job of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff? It's like, I'm not making the call. I'm going to try to lay out a lot of variables, a lot of options. You got to make the call. And so what are some of the ones that you can look at and where that model didn't work? And so, because it's that takes people on both sides of that relationship. So what have you found? Because there's also a point at which you're at a place in your life where you don't have to have a client who you don't enjoy anymore. Now, maybe enjoy is the wrong term. Okay. But you know what I'm getting at. And so what have you found about where you've gotten comfortable with who Dave is enough to be able to be more at choice about those things?
This is one of the hardest things, right? Because there's, particularly in the context of a firm, right? There's your own working happiness environment, people you want to be around. And then there's your obligation to sort of make sure that the firm is doing well. And so I have struggled with that over the years, right? And there have been I've fired clients over the years, of course, and they just said, you're not right for us. Usually it involves some level of wrongdoing.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's just that, like, look, go find somebody that likes this dynamic. I don't need it. But sometimes I'll try to pass them to somebody else. I'll sort of check with other partners and say, look, I do not have a good relationship with this client. It's contentious. We don't seem to vibe. Don't like my advice. You should, step in and see how it works. And so I try to find that balance. What I will say is that it rarely does work. That, it's usually them. No offense. I'm not trying to, my point is, difficult clients tend to be difficult clients no matter what we try to do as a thing. And What I would say is what's annoyed me most over the last 15 years, I don't know where it started exactly, but there became a little bit of this sort of founder. I work so often with founder driven companies, right? The visionary founder. I do all these dual class, triple class stocks, very, very heavily run by the visionary founder. And I love that kind of work. Those are the ones that break a lot of glass. But there also became some notion, I don't know where it happened, that service providers by definition are sort of a necessary. And it got to the point where and I won't name these companies or these CEOs, but like sometimes you'd get on, a call or something, and the sort of like, I hate lawyers. Like, it's not that funny. And then, you know what I mean? The Shakespeare jokes, I'm happy to hear those. But this idea that you're so next level thinking that lawyers, accountants, these sort of bureaucrats are just in your way. A little bit of that is totally fine, but I usually do well with those people because they quickly realize that, like, we're not all.
I'm not. Yeah, that's not you. Yeah.
But some of them hang on to it out of more to try to define themselves, right? It's a little bit of cachet in their world. Like, and well, I heard that Elon was a real asshole to his lawyers. I need to be even more of an asshole to prove I'm even more stable genius or whatever.
Yeah.
And so those have been the clients where I've sort of said, like, look, I am not the right person for you. There's plenty of firms that'll take your money and your abuse, but I don't have to. And so I think that is probably the most liberating thing. And I feel bad saying it sometimes, particularly to younger lawyers, because they don't have the financial stability to say those kinds of things. But I think it's important, right? I've told you this in the past, one of the things I'm most proud of this firm is not bending over when we were going to get fired by Elon, or to, the pressure on the law firms in the recent executive orders, right? And arguably one of our proudest moments is being on the outside of those firms that capitulated. And of course, if you look at the firms that did, it's all of our competitors. So
yeah, it hasn't necessarily turned out well. But you said something that is, you described two things. Part of it is there started to be a set of clients who didn't respect, I don't know if it was you as a human, but didn't respect the role. And but it's hard for those things not to carry over a little bit. And the other, though, is you got to the place where you could say the things you said, which is, that this isn't the right fit. I'm not right. And it's interesting because depending on your view of life, some people never have enough money to say that. And I'm sure people like that.
Yeah.
All right. Because, when you talk about some of the firms that capitulated, I mean, there are people who are, and for me, getting to the point where your personal, and it's not necessarily moral, okay, because it wasn't necessarily these people were doing, as you sometimes, you and I had one that did involve a person who was like, no, you can't do that, which is one of the places where I got to appreciate you, most very early on, but which I may come back to. But I think the thing for me is that place inside of you where you were able to do that. Because as you said, you have to balance your own interests. You're part of a firm. You have partners. Do you feel like, so how much of the factor that got you to that place was a deep enough, I won't say belief in yourself, but deep enough feeling that you're okay regardless of the consequences? And how much of it is actually financial? I mean, it's not the financial doesn't matter, but yeah, I'm trying, because this is the thing for me, the moments that you're describing there, because almost everybody who spends their life in corporations, you have those moments. All right. And, and it's a question of what you're willing, that's where, for me, there's this moment of personal power.
Yeah, and I do. You're right in that there's a better word for it. I don't know if it's even ethical feels a little bit over the top, because the truth, I don't vet all my clients for their behaviors. I think it's more to your point of, where sort of do you draw a line of your own personal comfort level with behaviors and or treatment, right? And for me, you're right. It's not really about money so much. I don't have fuck you money, unfortunately. But what I have realized over the years is that, there's just, like, I could go do anything around here or these clients or whatever, and it would be hard to take it away from you in any one fell swoop, right? But again, we can see it right now with our own eyes. I mean, I think one of the great disappointments for me personally in the last couple of years is watching complete and utter refusal to use fuck you money to say fuck you against negative forces in the world, right? I mean, it's just been deeply disturbed, because it's like, oh man, if you can get to this level of success and independence and you still chase the worst things in the world. So so it clearly isn't about money because we've seen
That's
we
the thing. But this is for me, I think a lot of people go, "Oh, well, that's a luxury because, they're rich or they made a lot of money," but it isn't. And you are around incredibly wealthy people, as you said, who are not making that same choice.
right, who 1,000 generations of their children couldn't be hurt by you,
Yeah.
literally. And so something else is at play, and maybe for each of those individuals, it's about power, it's about relevance, it's about competitiveness versus other billionaires, perhaps. Who knows? But for me, they're just the fears that we had as young men and women getting our start in jobs of somebody's going to turn you in unable to get good health care or unable to put food and
Yeah.
shelter on. Those days are so far gone. The question now is what could they hurt me at? I mean, could they take away how I'm seen by the thing I sort of take the most pride in, which again, the job I do as a lawyer in my field of space. Can they take that away from me? No, they can't. They could they can fire me off of a client. They could take away a deal. I could, lose my role in the firm or something like that. They can't really take away the thing that anymore. Yeah, so it's sort of, I don't know. Think about it as if you're Colin Kaepernick and you're playing in the NFL, I guess they can actually take away your association. And that the one thing you do best in the world is play football professionally. They can't really do that to me, luckily. And so thank God we're not in a world where, I mean, I could go start my own firm and do exactly what I do right now.
You could
Right.
go
And I'll,
Yeah, and that's, I think, the point is you have built, something which you yourself can destroy, by the way. I mean, if you
yeah,
watch,
sure.
yeah, well,
That part I'm very aware of.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you look at Bill Gates was at the Gates
Right.
Foundation doing a mea culpa, and Reid Hoffman's
Yeah.
going to have to do one, and so, but and to some degree, as he said, and they stared certain moral decisions down and made a choice, and so
Right.
what you have built over time, and you continue to buttress it, but you've built that core, is your personal brand, your personal reputation, who you are, who you stand for, and the relationships, that are out there, because one of the things I found is one of the common themes is people who are deeply involved in their professional life tend to have a lot of their friends or people they know professionally,
Hmm.
and the friend network. And so, and you will have built that. You've been involved. And so that, to some degree, that, as you just said, if I have to, I could go start another firm. I could go do, I could be independent. I could go do, you've got to that
Yeah.
place. You don't have to do that, and so you stayed where you are because where you are, gives you certain advantages and certain opportunities, but it also, you happen to be in a profession that has more flexibility than if you were an exec VP in a corporation. I mean, there's it's,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, you have to, so,
I mean,
yeah,
it's a travelable, sort of it's a take it with you skill set at some level, right? And so,
yes,
and yeah, would everything be the same? Would I lose some opportunities? Certainly could, but
doesn't
again,
matter.
I think it doesn't matter, right? I mean, to what end? I could do what I love, and I will not be destitute. And so those are powerful things to change the way you think about it. And I think it gives you a lot of freedom. And again, I think when that mentality pervades a leadership at an organization, the organization gets imputed that sort of confidence as well. And so, I have 30 people here that I work with so closely that we could go and build an organization that I think would be. I just don't need to because
Yeah, you don't have to.
because
You're in a
we're in a
place
good
that,
spot.
if you can talk about what have been some of the more interesting, you talked about three or four, of the IPOs and thing. What have been some of the more interesting things that you can talk about in, that you've, examples and learning and things that you've done in your life?
Yeah, it's truly been a little all over the place, but I think the ones that have been interesting to me have largely related to personality issues, right? So
Yeah.
again, not personality, personnel related issues. So, I've sort of been around a number of the
You
sort
could
of
say the names.
dramatic.
You could say the names. I mean, it's, unless you're not allowed to say names, I think it's helpful part of this is the street cred that comes from the places you played. It's like I use the metaphor as like high level business is like professional sports. If what you were doing is playing baseball on, the AAA team and, wherever, that's one thing. If you've been in the World Series a few times, it's a different thing. And so, in the world you're in, you played at a very high professional level. So
Yeah. So again, I think, if you take, I do think that moment in time in the Uber boardroom, and obviously this, book written about it, was just an extraordinary place to sit side by side. The company going through sort of, hard to understand growth levels at the time with, a VC that put in, $12 million that became worth 3 billion. And so just imagine the extraordinary illiquid 3 billion at the time. Just imagine the extraordinary amount of pressure on the maintenance of that in the face of a company that was clearly not paying attention to good hygiene and
yeah, good
governance, and
for
the hallways filled with sex and drugs and all sorts of massively bad behaviors, and then coming to a head, right? At this like short crucial moment of time. So that was in a boardroom where literally somebody would say, "Dave, can you tell that director that they can go fuck themselves?" And they say that, like, they wouldn't talk,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So that was one, sort of the famous explosion of Zenefits, which at one time was, sort of the poster child of all things Silicon Valley SaaS,
yeah,
that just exploded around us, and ultimately in one of the great like fraud stories of our time. That boardroom was interesting, and you just look at now, it's like David Sachs took over and is now sort of
yeah,
sitting at the heart of the White House decision making around tech. So, and then some of it's just fun stuff, right?
yeah.
Where, like, during the Snap IPO, because Evan was getting engaged to his wife at the time, and there was so much paparazzi, we'd get a call in the morning telling us where we were going to go draft the S1 in a secret location. And he would helicopter in for like 10 minutes to give us more advice. And that was like, some of these are just sort of
Fun.
extraordinary
Yeah,
moments and fun, great, silly kind of stuff, at some level. But the more I think, again, the tech companies in particular find in new and interesting ways to, I took Zynga public years ago, and back when Pincus was sort of the richest guy in San Francisco, we were dealing with like an insane amount of unique characteristics for what a CEO could be compensated for before, it came
yeah.
out later that and Larry were doing the same thing, but nobody knew about it at the time. So there's just been a lot of those types over the years where, again, the job is not terribly legal. It's mostly, consigliere is a good way to
Yeah,
say it, trying to
yeah,
cool down heads, trying to be a middleman in sort of non-legal problems that could easily explode if personalities don't come together. And so, most of those, with the exception of Zenefits and a few others that found themselves
yeah.
literally unable to get through it all, came out on the other side. And those are the great moments, right?
Agree.
Where it looks possible, and then it comes out the other end and things go well.
So when you look at life, and you look at, one of the things is the people who, somebody I've talked to, they've used like people who were sponsors, people who, as you were developing, then there's people who was, people who were mentors, some people allies, there are things. How do you have people that, what would define the relationship with people that you say were important on the journey to where you are now? What were some of the characteristics of those relationships?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's mentors here at the firm that brought me into many of those situations where, again, you sort of trial by fire a little bit. Those are important pieces. I would say board members at VCs and the like that you get to know over the years, that sort of think of you in a situation. I think as you're in this space more, I often will get calls on companies that I'm not involved with at all, where a board member will say, "Hey, you should really call Dave to help work through this because it doesn't feel like your current counsel's attuned to the issue." Sometimes it's other lawyers. I have extraordinarily close friends that are competitors at, all the big name firms, where, I reach out to them all the time and they do the same thing. And sometimes I loop them into clients where I just think that they're, the right person for the job. So it's not there's an ecosystem. Bankers, obviously if you're in the capital market space, I think half of my work comes from relationships I've built with, bankers over, a decade or more. They don't usually last as long as we do. There's very few left that are there 25 years, but there's a couple. And so, you build those relationships. And again, they're sort of, you're one of the 3 or 4 lawyers when they get asked by a company who they should think about. And so that ecosystem, I think, is as important as anything else. I'm sure you have similar situations with different executives who move on and different folks all the time. But I do think it is as you do this long enough, the world gets increasingly small around you, and those people are sort of there. I mean, I don't actually think there's many people out there that badmouth me anymore, even against me. It's we're sort of in this together.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that also has to do with the character decisions you make. I mean, if you'd gone differently on some things, you might get a different answer.
Sure, that's right.
So
Yeah.
one of the things I've noticed that I would say maybe a generational difference is the network of people you built is not based on what they can do for you. All the things you described, those are not transactional relationships. There's some essence to those where the person isn't looking at you squinty eyed, like what does Dave want? And I think, but you described it. I mean, you've built, between competitors, peers, people in these companies. And so it comes back to something we said. I mean, the place you're at in your life is built on the shoulders of all of those things. And where I found where people go wrong is forgetting about that. To some degree, if you're going through life on what can everybody else do for me and how do I get for me, you're going to reap that ultimately, and, you don't. I mean, nobody looks at Dave and thinks Dave is trying to maximize his billable hours.
No, and I think I do think, yeah, I think you sort of hit the nail on the head for the way I feel about it, right? Which is I just don't want. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if you feel this way, but I've always kind of felt this way. Like I want my assets bigger than my liabilities in terms of how I interact with the rest of the world, right? And so, there's time and place where you need some help in captain some chicks, but and I see a lot of people out there that do spend most of their time sort of working their way through it, and they're just getting further and further in the red. And I don't know, part of that might just be the way we were, grew up or whatever. But I have a deep abiding avoidance of one seeming like a sellout. So, arguably when I think about what's the most important thing, if somebody were to describe, I would say authenticity. I think somewhere when I was 35, it stopped being that I was funny because you just can't make the same amount of jokes as you can when you're young. And it became sort of being authentic, being, who you are. And so by definition, the car salesman types of the world are the deeply inauthentic. And I find myself sometimes, right, I'll be pitching a company, we're really excited about it. Somebody gave my name. I got a team there. I want Cooley to win, but I can just tell that I'm going to have to pretend to be somebody I'm not in order to win it. And I just don't want to do it. So it's oh, well, we chose the wrong guy for this. It's not going to work. But and that's there's a cost to that, but it's well overpaid for for what
there's the cost of that in a sense. But I think your balance sheet model resonates with me because that's I've tried to explain that to people is I do look at life and relationships as a balance sheet. So I want to always give more than I receive. I used to, go into meetings with people and said, look, how can I serve you? And I meant, which is incredibly disarming for a lot of people. I don't know, but it's true.
Right.
I'm more interested in what I can contribute to helping somebody get what they want, because that's the derivative. And that builds the foundation, that you're talking about. And that theme, for me, that the thematic thing here is if you go through life, you will be building up a balance sheet. And a lot of people look at balance sheets in dollars and cents, but I think the foundational balance sheet is the one we're talking about here. What is the net balance sheet of how you've existed in the world, and how you've touched other people and, and the contributions you've made. And that's so Keanu Reeves was, I guess he was on Colbert, and Colbert said, Keanu, what do you think happens when we die? And he paused for a moment and he said, I don't know. He said, but I think the people who loved us will miss us. And, you're kind of like, that's sort of this,
Yeah.
is that there'd be a hole. There will, at some moment there won't be a Dave and there won't be an Anthony, there'll be a hole. And, hopefully those days are long down the road, but,
Yeah.
but those
Hey.
moments, those moments come.
Yeah.
And I think that's your balance sheet, your balance sheet part. And so, it's one of the things I've enjoyed about you, always. There's just there's just an energy that you have that is it's net positive. So I've enjoyed our our times together. Which
Yeah,
and when I
appreciate
was
that. Yeah, me
yeah, I mean, and when I was looking to do this, it's your name came to mind because for some people it's like, well, Dave is still to some degree fully working and fully employed. I go, yeah, but and
yeah, it's true. It
yeah.
is true. So